You know that moment when you realize the very people you sacrificed everything for would watch you drown without tossing a rope. That's how this story begins, with the sound of my daughter's palm striking my cheek in front of 180 wedding guests, followed by a silence so thick it felt like the room was holding its breath. I'm 54 years old, and I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, and why sometimes the only mercy is letting people face the consequences of their actions. The morning of the wedding. On the morning of Rachel's wedding, I stood alone in my empty house in Connecticut, staring at the boxes stacked by the walls. I hadn't put the house on the market because I wanted to. It was the place where I'd raised my children, celebrated their first steps, nursed them through sickness. I was selling it because I had no choice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rachel, my youngest, 26 years old, was marrying into wealth, while I was liquidating assets just to stay afloat. My other two children, Mason and Alexander, had made their positions clear months ago when I asked for help covering my late husband's medical bills. You need to downsize anyway, Mum, Mason had said, not looking up from his phone. That house is too big for just you. Alexander, always the financial advisor to everyone except his own mother, had been blunter. We can't support your poor financial planning. Dad died 3 years ago, you should have figured it out by now. Poor financial planning. As if spending our savings on experimental treatment to try and save their father was some kind of moral failure. The drive to the wedding. It took me 2 hours to drive to the Hamptons through October traffic. Autumn weddings were trendy now, as Rachel had told me during one of our brief phone calls. Everything about this wedding was on trend: organic floral installations, farm-to-table catering, Edison bulb lighting strung through oak trees. It was beautiful, I'll admit, even as I tallied up the cost in my head, minimum $70,000, maybe more. I parked between a Tesla and a Porsche, suddenly hyper-aware of my 12-year-old Honda. Inside, I found my table, number 15, all the way in the back, seated with Rachel's college classmates and their husbands. Not with family. Family, it seemed, sat at tables 1 through 4. I was no longer considered family. You must be Rachel's mum, chirped a polished blonde woman in her 30s, extending a manicured hand. I'm Amelia, from her yoga group, she talks about you all the time. She didn't. But I smiled anyway. Lovely to meet you. The ceremony. The ceremony was flawless. Rachel looked radiant in her $1,500 gown, walking down the aisle to a live string quartet that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Logan, her fiancé, came from pharmaceutical money. His family owned a chain of private clinics across New England. I watched my daughter vow to love this man, and I felt nothing. No pride, no joy, not even sadness. Just emptiness. Like I was watching a photo of someone I used to know. The toasts. The toasts began after the main course. Logan's father spoke first, welcoming Rachel into their family with a warmth I hadn't felt from my own children in years. Logan's best friend shared college anecdotes. Then came the family. Mason went first. His speech was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while sounding thoughtful. He talked about watching Rachel become a force of nature, how proud he was of her authenticity. Not once did he mention me, the one who drove her to dance lessons, attended every recital, helped her through an eating disorder in high school. Alexander's speech was shorter, mostly focused on Logan and how lucky Rachel was to find someone who could provide for her the way she deserves. Again, no mention of the woman who provided for her for 26 years. Then Rachel stood, champagne flute in hand, cheeks flushed from excitement and alcohol. This was her moment, her chance to thank the people who made this day possible. That's when Logan leaned in and whispered something in her ear. I saw her expression shift, something cold and calculated flickered in her eyes. She looked directly at me across the room, and I knew, with the kind of certainty only a mother can have, that what came next would change everything. Before I thank everyone, there's something I need to say. Her voice rang perfectly clear in the hushed hall. Some of you may be wondering why my father isn't here to walk me down the aisle. He died 3 years ago. And my mother. She paused, letting the word hang like an accusation. My mother spent every cent he left us on a treatment we all knew wouldn't work. She was selfish. Desperate. And now she expects us to clean up her mess. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wedding, this day, this life I'm building with Logan, it has nothing to do with her. She made her choices. Now she has to live with them. Then she raised her glass toward me, a toast that felt more like a curse. And then she walked over, leaned in, and slapped me across the face, hard enough to make my ears ring. The silence that followed was deafening. All 180 guests watched, waiting to see what I would do. Cry. Beg. Make a scene. Instead, I laughed, quietly, genuinely, which seemed to surprise everyone, including myself. Now I know, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. My response. I stood, walked up to the microphone Rachel had left behind, and smiled at the sea of stunned faces. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter's wedding, I began, calm and clear. Since Rachel decided to make this about family finances, I think it's only fair everyone hears the full story. I saw Logan's parents exchange glances. Pharmaceutical wealth did not enjoy messy family drama. My daughter is 3 months pregnant, I announced, watching Rachel's face crumble. Congratulations are in order, though I suspect Logan's family may be interested in the fact that the timeline doesn't quite match your engagement story. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Logan went pale, his eyes fixed on Rachel, who was now shaking her head frantically. But that's not why I'm at the mic, I continued. I'm here because my children seem to think I'm a foolish old woman who squandered their inheritance on hopeless treatment. What they don't know is I've spent the last 8 months working with a very thorough forensic accountant. Alexander stood now, his chair scraping loudly. Mom, stop. Please. I ignored him. When you're facing financial ruin, you start paying very close attention to where your money went. And while I did spend our savings trying to save their father, a choice I'd make again without hesitation, I found some interesting discrepancies in our family trust. 3 years ago, after my husband's diagnosis, someone accessed our joint accounts and funneled large sums into shell companies. Companies registered to my eldest son's business address. Whispers filled the room. Phones quietly rose to record. My son, the financial advisor, who told me to learn to live within my means, helped himself to nearly $230,000 of those means. And Mason, I said, turning to my middle child, who now gripped his champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Your revolutionary crypto startup you couldn't explain. I can. It's called theft when you use your mother's credit cards to buy digital assets she can't access. Mason stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. You don't know what you're talking about. $89,000, Mason. That's what I'm talking about. That's what you stole from the woman who gave you life while she watched her husband die. And Rachel, I said, turning back to my daughter, who looked like she wanted to sink into her $1,500 dress. You were the most creative of all. She was crying now, mascara streaking down her face. Mom, please. Don't. My daughter, a lifestyle influencer with 35,000 followers, was very busy building her brand. What her followers don't know is that every sponsored post, every product plug, every authentic recommendation was funded by money siphoned from her dying father's medical account. I held up my phone, showing screenshots of the transfers. $52,000 on cosmetic treatments, $15,000 on Hermes bag for an unboxing video, $8,000 on a weekend in Aspen, tagged #blessed. All taken from the account meant for experimental treatments that could have bought her father another year. The best part? None of them thought I'd find out. They thought I was just a grieving widow, too broken, too stupid to notice her children were picking her bones clean while she planned a funeral. I returned the mic to the stand and looked at the three strangers who used to be my babies. Yes, Rachel. You're absolutely right. This wedding, this life you're building, it has nothing to do with me. Because I'm done. Done being your bank, your insurance policy, your well of unconditional love you can drain without consequence. The fallout. The exodus started immediately. Guests grabbed handbags and jackets, whispering as they left. I watched Logan lean into Rachel, his voice too low to hear, but his body language said everything. He looked betrayed, disappointed. When the hall finally emptied, my three children approached me. You ruined everything, Alexander hissed. Rachel's wedding. Our family. I didn't ruin anything, I said calmly. I just exposed what was already broken. Mason grabbed my arm. You can't prove any of this. You're a bitter old woman making things up. I looked down at his hand, then back at him. Let go of me, Mason. Now. Something in my voice must have reached him, because he did. Rachel was lashed, her wedding gown trailing behind her. Mum, how could you do this to me, of all days? The same way you stole from me while your father was dying. The same way you slapped me in front of 180 people. I looked at her one last time. I raised you all better than this. I taught you to be kind. Grateful. To care for the people who love you. Instead, you became predators. A new life. The drive to Oscar's farm in Vermont took 4 hours because of the night traffic. He was waiting on the porch with coffee and a blanket, as if he knew exactly when I'd arrive. How was it? He asked. Better than I expected. Worse than they deserved. Oscar had known me for 25 years, since vet school. He'd been in love with me back then, though I was too caught up in meeting and marrying Charlie to notice. When I chose marriage and children over career, Oscar chose animals and solitude. The guest room's ready, he said softly. But you know you can stay as long as you need. I'd been living in his guest room for 3 weeks, ever since the house sale closed. Oscar had offered without hesitation, just as he'd offered everything else over the years, help with the kids, a shoulder to cry on during Charlie's illness, practical advice when the bills started piling up. Any word from them? He asked. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through 23 missed calls from Mason, 31 from Alexander, and 47 from Rachel. The voicemails ranged from angry to desperate to threatening and back to desperate. They want to talk, I said. Want to explain, apologize, fix things. Do you want to hear what they have to say? A month ago, I might have said yes. A month ago, I still believed families could heal, that love could overcome anything. No, I said, feeling something settle firmly in my chest. I don't. 1 year later. A year after Rachel's wedding, I stood in a Vermont courthouse in a simple cream dress, holding Oscar's hand as the justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife. No guests, no reception, no social media posts, just two people who found each other after decades of waiting. Oscar kissed me when the ceremony ended, and I tasted freedom on his lips. We drove home to the farm, our farm now, with the paperwork signed that morning making me an equal partner in both the veterinary practice and the land. The autumn maples blazed red and gold around us, and I thought about cycles, about things that die and come back to life. My phone had been silent for months. No more calls from Mason, whose crypto ventures had finally collapsed. No desperate voicemails from Alexander, whose financial consulting business crumbled after his clients discovered his embezzlement. And no more teary pleading from Rachel, who gave birth in March, to a daughter, whose paternity test confirmed what everyone suspected. Each of them had tried different tactics, lawyers who threatened lawsuits that went nowhere because the truth was an absolute defense, family friends who begged for reconciliation, which I politely but firmly declined. But on my wedding day, all I felt was peace. Oscar and I spent our wedding night delivering twin calves at the Morrison farm, working by lantern light in a barn that smelled of hay and new beginnings. Any regrets? Oscar asked as we cleaned up. About what? Marrying you or cutting them out of my life? Both. I considered, watching the sunrise paint Vermont's hills in gold through the barn windows. Regret is just pride in disguise. You regret things when you can't accept that your choices had consequences. And my choices led me here, to you, to this life, to work that matters. If I'd kept supporting my kids, letting them steal from me and treat me like a disposable resource, I'd still be trapped in that cycle. Oscar pulled me into his arms, and I marveled at how right it felt. Besides, regret assumes I had viable alternatives. What was I supposed to do? Keep funding Rachel's lifestyle while she called me names? Pretend Alexander's embezzlement was a misunderstanding? Keep excusing Mason while he stole my credit cards? You could have forgiven them. I could have supported them, I corrected. There's a difference. Later that day, while Oscar napped in our bedroom, the master bedroom I'd moved into 2 months ago, finally ready to share a bed with someone who saw me as an equal, I sat on the porch with coffee and opened my laptop. The forensic accountant had finally finished his work. The full extent of my children's theft was laid out in spreadsheets and bank records, $412,000 stolen over 4 years, while their father was dying and I was too grief-stricken to notice the systematic draining of our accounts. I opened a new email and started typing. The first went to the IRS with documentation of the unreported income for all 3 children. The second to the State Attorney General, reporting Alexander's financial crimes against elderly clients. The third to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit with details of Mason's crypto scams. I sent all 3 and closed my laptop. Oscar found me there an hour later. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Justice," I said. "And the difference between revenge and consequences." A year ago, I thought about revenge constantly. I wanted them to suffer like they made me suffer. But now I understand, revenge would have meant staying tied to them, keeping them in my life so I could watch them fall. That would have made me just another kind of predator. Instead, you chose consequences. I chose to let the world respond to their actions the way it responds to thieves, liars, and frauds. I didn't create their punishment, I just stopped shielding them from it. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I looked down and saw Rachel's name. I had the baby. A girl. Named her Lilo after Grandma. I hope someday you'll want to meet her. I showed the message to Oscar, who read it and shook his head. She's still trying to manipulate you. Even now, I agreed, deleting the message without replying. Do you ever think you'll want to meet the child? It was a fair question, and I considered it honestly. Maybe. When she's old enough to form her own ideas about right and wrong. When she's old enough to choose her family based on character, not genetics. What if she grows up like her mother? Then she'll learn, like everyone else, that actions have consequences. We sat in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over the farm. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear cattle bedding down, and closer, the barn cats beginning their nightly hunt. It was a good life, built on honest work and mutual respect, and on the kind of love that doesn't require sacrificing your dignity. My children will never understand that. They'll see my happiness as cruelty, my peace as selfishness. Let them. Their version of the truth is just another performance, another attempt to manipulate the sympathy of strangers. I know the real truth. That love without boundaries isn't love, it's dependency. That family built on guilt and obligation will always collapse. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people face the consequences of their own actions. And they know something else, something I wouldn't have believed a year ago. That life can begin again at 54. That love can grow from the ashes of betrayal. That justice, served cold, is still justice. Oscar squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, endlessly grateful for the man who waited 25 years to love me the right way. The stars swirled overhead, and I was finally, completely free. Epilogue, 2 years later. As I write this, it's been 2 years since the courthouse wedding in the Green Mountains. My life is unrecognizable now, in the best way. Every morning I wake up in our farmhouse to the sound of animals outside. Oscar and I are true partners, in the vet practice, in running the farm, in life. We deliver calves at dawn, treat wounded deer, rescue abandoned kittens. It's work that matters, work that heals not just animals, but my own soul. As for my children, I occasionally hear about them through mutual acquaintances. Mason served 6 months in federal prison for crypto fraud and now works at a hardware store. Alexander moved to Florida, but his financial mess followed him south. Rachel lost custody of her daughter Lilu due to drug issues and now lives in a rehab center. I don't feel joy in their pain. But I also don't feel the need to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. Each of them had every opportunity to live differently, to love better, to treat the woman who gave them life with respect. They chose another path. Leela now lives with Logan's parents, decent people who stepped up to care for an innocent child caught in the crossfire of adult war. Sometimes I think about my granddaughter, wonder if she'll ever learn the truth of what happened, or want to meet the grandmother she never knew. For now, I'm content to wait. If she ever comes to me with questions, I'll tell her the truth, not to shame her mother, but to help her understand that love must have limits, that respect is earned, not owed, and that sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to walk away from toxic people, even if they're family. In the meantime, I live my new life, grateful every day for a second chance at happiness, for a partner who sees me as an equal, for work that fills my soul with purpose. Some bridges truly aren't worth rebuilding. Some people won't change, no matter how many chances you give them. And sometimes, the deepest act of self-love is simply to walk away. I've finally learned this vital truth. You can't save people from themselves. But you can save yourself from them. And that's exactly what I did. The end.